The armored truck hummed steadily down the highway, its vibrations matching the controlled rhythm of Randy White's breathing. Behind him, locked away in reinforced steel, sat $3 million in cash, paper rectangles that had haunted his thoughts for months. Every mile brought him closer to the moment he'd rehearsed countless times in his mind, the instant when his mundane life would fracture, and a new, dangerous one would begin. Randy wasn't born a criminal. By all appearances, he was an ordinary man, 33 years old, average build, soft-spoken, and polite to a fault. His wife, Donna, was much the same. She spent her days caring for their 2 young children and trying to make ends meet on Randy's modest salary. Together, they lived a life that was unremarkable, one that they had quietly resigned themselves to. But desperation has a way of unraveling even the most predictable lives. Their home in Augusta, Georgia was small and in constant disrepair, with a roof that leaked during every heavy rainstorm. The kitchen, Donna's domain, bore the scars of overuse and years of patchwork fixes. Their financial struggles weren't new, but they had become unbearable. Randy's paycheck as an armored truck driver at Loomis Fargo wasn't stretching far enough anymore, and the pile of unpaid bills on the counter seemed to mock them daily. Randy had spent countless nights sitting in their living room, staring into the dim glow of the television, consumed by the gnawing anxiety of financial failure. The solution to his problems didn't appear to him as a sudden epiphany. It was a slow, creeping thought, born of frustration and nurtured by his proximity to temptation. Every day he drove millions of dollars across the state, completely reliant on trust. It was a responsibility that once filled him with pride, but now filled him with questions. How much money was too much to resist? As the weeks passed, Randy's thoughts turned into quiet observations. He began to scrutinize the routines he had once followed without question, the stops, the checks, the vulnerabilities in the system. Loomis Fargo relied heavily on the integrity of its employees, and Randy knew the trust placed in him was both his greatest asset and the company's weakest link. He noticed how quickly the cash was loaded and how little oversight accompanied the truck's movements once it left the bank. The routes were consistent, the schedules predictable, and most importantly, there were moments when Randy was alone with the cargo. These moments became the foundation of his plan. He began sketching out scenarios in his mind, where he could divert the truck, how much time he would have before someone noticed, and where he could disappear afterward. It was methodical, almost clinical, every detail analyzed and refined. Randy didn't share his plan with Donna right away. He didn't need to. The tension in their lives was a silent but ever-present force. Donna, though, had begun to notice a change in him. He became quieter, more focused. At night, he would sit at the kitchen table long after the children were asleep, jotting down notes in a spiral-bound notebook he kept tucked under his arm. When he finally told her, it wasn't a plea or a question. It was a statement of intent. He laid out his plan like a blueprint, detailing each step with precision. Donna didn't react immediately. She didn't need to. She could feel the inevitability of it. She saw it in the way Randy's hands trembled slightly as he spoke and in the hard set of his jaw. It wasn't just a scheme to escape poverty. It was an escape from everything. Years of humiliation, frustration, and fear of failure. It was a declaration of war against the system that had left them gasping for air. In the weeks leading up to the heist, Randy and Donna transformed their home into a war room. Maps of Georgia's rural roads were spread across the dining table, red lines marking potential routes of escape. They gathered supplies, wigs, fake IDs, and burner phones. Randy even rehearsed driving alternate routes late at night, ensuring he knew every twist and turn by heart. The plan was simple in theory, but relied heavily on precise timing and an unshakable poker face. On the day of the heist, Randy would fake a mechanical failure during a rural stop. While his co-worker inspected the engine, Randy would take the truck and disappear. Donna's role was equally critical. She would pack the children and a carefully selected stash of essentials into their second-hand car and drive to a predetermined motel. Once Randy arrived with the money, they would leave Augusta for good. It wasn't just a robbery. It was a complete erasure of their old lives. The morning of the robbery dawned gray and unremarkable. Randy kissed Donna and the kids goodbye, just as he always did, and climbed into the armored truck with his usual stoic expression. Inside, his thoughts raced, but he kept his movements measured and routine. As the truck made its way through Augusta, Randy felt the weight of the cash behind him. He knew the exact figure, $3 million, bundled and secured. He could almost feel its presence, as though the money had its own gravitational pull. The moment of action came at a nondescript stretch of road outside a rural bank. Randy slowed the truck and muttered something about the engine overheating. His coworker, annoyed but unsuspecting, climbed out to check. Randy didn't hesitate. He locked the doors, shifted into gear, and drove off, leaving his partner standing in the dust. By the time the alarm was raised, Randy was already several miles away. He abandoned the armored truck on a desolate back road, stripped of its tracking devices and emptied of its contents. The $3 million was loaded into Donna's car, and the Whites were on the move. Their house in Augusta was abandoned, its front door swinging open as law enforcement arrived. The neighbors were baffled, describing the Whites as a quiet, hard-working family. "They just vanished," one neighbor later said, shaking her head. For Randy and Donna, vanishing wasn't a choice, it was a necessity. They drove through the night, trading their familiar life for a future filled with uncertainty. In a dingy motel room far from Augusta, Randy and Donna counted the money in silence. The stacks of bills seemed surreal, almost too much to comprehend. But there was no time for celebration. Every mile they put between themselves and Augusta was a race against the inevitable. For now, they had succeeded. But as the sun rose the next morning, Randy couldn't shake the feeling that their freedom had come at a cost he had yet to fully understand. The sun set behind them as Randy and Donna White sped away from their old life, their car packed with hastily gathered belongings, and the $3 million that would either secure their future or lead to their downfall. The stolen money didn't feel real yet. Bundled in duffel bags beneath a pile of clothes, it was almost as though it didn't exist, a fantasy born of desperation. The Whites didn't speak much during those first hours on the road. Randy's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles pale, while Donna stared out the window, her mind spinning through 1,000 possibilities. They had no time to reflect on what they'd done. Their immediate focus was survival. The Whites didn't just run, they vanished. Over the next several weeks, they moved between motels, campgrounds, and small rental properties, never staying anywhere long enough to draw attention. Randy had spent months studying how fugitives were caught, and he was determined not to make the same mistakes. The first step was shedding their identities. Randy became David Cross, a mechanic from Alabama, while Donna took on the name Susan. They obtained fake IDs from a contact Randy had met years ago, paying him in cash and leaving no trace of the transaction. Donna was the one who transformed their appearances. She dyed her hair a dark brown, cut it short, and swapped her usual modest wardrobe for baggy, unflattering clothing. Randy grew out his beard, traded his work shirts for flannel, and wore a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. Even their mannerisms changed. Randy, once a quiet but polite man, adopted a gruff, no-nonsense demeanor, while Donna deliberately avoided eye contact with strangers. They coached their children, who were too young to fully understand the gravity of the situation, to refer to them by their new names. For the first few months, paranoia ruled their lives. Every car that trailed behind them for more than a few miles felt like an FBI agent closing in. Every knock on the door made Donna's heart race, her mind leaping to worst-case scenarios. To stretch their stolen money, the Whites lived frugally, renting modest apartments in working-class neighborhoods where no one asked questions. They shopped at discount stores, avoided flashy purchases, and paid for everything in cash. For Randy, the hardest part was the constant vigilance. He avoided highways, stuck to back roads, and refused to stay in any one town for more than a few weeks. Each morning, he scanned the local news for stories about the heist, searching for any indication that the FBI was closing in. Donna, on the other hand, struggled with the isolation. She missed her family and the friends she had left behind. Once, while staying in a small town in Tennessee, she caught herself dialing her sister's number out of habit. Her hand hovered over the call button for several seconds before she remembered the risk. She deleted the number and threw the phone into the trash, her chest tightening with a mixture of grief and guilt. By the end of their first year on the run, the Whites had begun to settle into their new identities. They rented a modest house in a small town in the Midwest, far from the hustle and bustle of city life. Randy found work as a handyman, taking on cash-only jobs that required no paperwork. Donna began homeschooling their children, ensuring that no one at the local schools would recognize their faces. The money, carefully hidden in multiple locations, became their lifeline. Randy had divided it into smaller bundles, stashing it in safety deposit boxes, storage units, and even buried containers in remote wooded areas. They withdrew only what they needed, using it sparingly to avoid suspicion. Despite their precautions, the strain of their double lives began to show. Donna grew withdrawn, her once bright personality dulled by the constant fear of discovery. Randy, though outwardly stoic, became increasingly short-tempered, snapping at minor inconveniences. The couple's children, though blissfully unaware of the heist itself, sensed the tension. The family moved frequently, each relocation explained with vague excuses about work or safety. The children grew accustomed to fleeting friendships and makeshift homes, but the instability left its mark. Randy's intuition, honed by years of vigilance, warned him that something was amiss. He noticed unfamiliar cars parked near their house, their occupants seemingly preoccupied but too conveniently positioned. Pedestrians lingered longer than usual, their gazes drifting toward the Whites' modest home. "We're being watched," Randy told Donna one evening, his voice low but urgent. Though Donna initially dismissed his concerns as paranoia, she soon noticed the signs as well. Anxiety gripped her as she moved through her daily routines, her eyes darting toward every unfamiliar face. They packed their belongings once more, this time abandoning the house in the dead of night. Randy instructed the children to remain silent, his voice firm but calm as they loaded the car and drove off into the darkness. With their options dwindling, the Whites decided to head west. Randy believed the vast expanse of the American Midwest would offer them anonymity, and they avoided highways, relying on back roads and rural routes to stay under the radar. The journey was grueling, both physically and emotionally. Donna's silence became a constant companion, her thoughts consumed by the weight of their circumstances. Randy focused on the road, his mind racing through contingency plans as they passed through one small town after another. Back in Augusta, chaos erupted. Randy's coworker, still stranded on the side of the road, had flagged down a passing car and called the police. Within an hour, the armored truck was located, abandoned, empty, and utterly devoid of clues. By nightfall, the FBI had taken over the case. Agents swarmed the Whites' neighborhood, canvassing their home and questioning neighbors. What they found was baffling. No obvious signs of criminal intent, no indications of a lavish lifestyle, and no clear motive. Special Agent Lawrence Quinn, who led the investigation, later described his first impression of the case. "It didn't fit the usual profile," he explained. "Randy and Donna weren't career criminals. They weren't flashy or reckless. It was almost like they'd been planning to disappear long before the heist." Quinn's instincts were correct. The Whites had spent months preparing for this moment, erasing their digital footprints and carefully mapping their escape. The Whites' ability to disappear baffled investigators. In the weeks following the heist, the FBI received hundreds of tips, but most were dead ends. Sightings poured in from across the country. Randy and Donna had been seen in Florida, Texas, even as far away as Canada, but none could be confirmed. Agent Quinn became obsessed with the case. He pored over surveillance footage from ATMs, gas stations, and convenience stores, hoping to catch a glimpse of the couple. He interviewed their friends and family, searching for any indication of where they might have gone. "They didn't just vanish," Quinn told his team during a late-night strategy meeting. "No one just disappears. They've got to be making mistakes somewhere. We just haven't found them yet." But the Whites weren't making mistakes. Randy's research had paid off. They avoided airports, ATMs, and anything else that could leave a digital trail. They communicated with each other and their children in vague, coded phrases, never discussing the heist or the money directly. Agent Lawrence Quinn, the lead investigator on the case, took the failure personally. He had chased fugitives before, but the Whites' ability to evade capture was unparalleled. As the months turned into years, the urgency around the case began to wane. Other pressing investigations demanded the FBI's attention, and the trail of the Whites grew colder with every passing day. By the late 1990s, the story had all but faded from public memory. The once sensational headlines about the missing millions were replaced with newer scandals and crimes. For the Whites, it seemed as though time had granted them freedom. For law enforcement, however, the case remained a stubborn mystery, a scar that refused to fade. The early 2000s ushered in a new era of investigative tools. While the Whites had been careful to avoid leaving digital footprints, the technological landscape had changed dramatically since their disappearance. New systems allowed the FBI to cross-reference vast amounts of data, from financial transactions to vehicle registrations, in ways previously unimaginable. Quinn, now a seasoned agent with a wealth of experience, saw an opportunity to reignite the hunt. He believed the Whites had grown complacent, their initial caution eroded by years of successful evasion. "People make mistakes when they think they're safe," Quinn told his team, "and we finally have the tools to catch them." The FBI reopened the case, leveraging cutting-edge facial recognition software to analyze old surveillance footage and cross-check it against current records. Though the results were far from conclusive, the renewed effort breathed life into the investigation. It was a small mistake, something Randy would later kick himself for, but it was enough to draw attention. While filling up his truck at a gas station, he used a counterfeit ID that had recently been flagged by authorities. The clerk didn't notice at the time, but when the ID number was later entered into a database, it triggered a red flag. The FBI, now desperate for leads, quickly connected the ID to a known forgery ring and began tracking its usage. Though they didn't yet know where Randy and Donna were, the mistake gave them their first real break in months. One day, Donna experienced the fragility of their anonymity in stark detail. She had taken the children to a local grocery store, her guard momentarily lowered in the rhythm of daily errands. While maneuvering through crowded aisles, she noticed a man watching her. He looked vaguely familiar, his brows knitting in recognition as he studied her face. "Donna, is that you?" he asked, his voice tinged with uncertainty. Her heart stopped. The man, a distant relative she hadn't seen in years, stood just a few feet away. For a split second she froze, grappling with how to respond. "I'm sorry, you must have me confused with someone else," she replied, forcing a polite smile. Though the man eventually shrugged and walked away, the encounter left her shaken. She abandoned her cart, rushed the children back to the car, and drove home, her mind racing. That night she recounted the incident to Randy, her voice trembling with fear. "We have to leave," she said firmly. "It's not safe here anymore." Randy agreed without hesitation. The next day they packed their belongings and disappeared into the night, leaving no trace behind. By 2005, Randy and Donna White had lived under assumed identities for over a decade. The couple, once daring enough to execute a $3 million heist, now spent their days in quiet obscurity. Time had dulled their edges but sharpened their anxieties. Despite their caution, the cracks in their armor began to show. Randy and Donna argued more frequently, their fights fueled by the stress of constant vigilance. Donna's growing despair clashed with Randy's stubborn resolve to maintain their fugitive lifestyle. "How much longer, Randy?" Donna asked one evening, her voice breaking under the weight of years spent hiding. "As long as it takes," Randy replied, his tone a mix of frustration and determination. "We didn't come this far to get caught now." What they didn't know was that their past was finally catching up to them. The break that investigators had been waiting for came almost by accident. A small-town police officer in Ohio submitted a routine report about a suspicious encounter with a local handyman who had no valid ID. The man had claimed his name was Rob Carter, but something about his demeanor had struck the officer as unusual. The report filtered through the system, eventually landing on the desk of a junior FBI analyst. She flagged the incident, noting a resemblance between the man described and an aged-up version of Randy White based on FBI composite sketches. Simultaneously, another lead emerged from an unlikely source. A retired neighbor from one of the Whites' former residences in Ohio stumbled across an old news article about the heist while browsing online. The photos accompanying the piece triggered her memory of a couple she'd once known as Mark and Diane. Though she couldn't be certain, she decided to submit an anonymous tip to the FBI. When the two leads converged, Agent Quinn's instincts kicked into high gear. While individually neither clue would have merited much attention, together they formed a tantalizing puzzle. Quinn ordered his team to cross-reference utility records, rental agreements, and employment history for anyone fitting the Whites' descriptions. He knew they would likely be using aliases, but patterns of behavior, frequent moves, cash payments, and isolated lifestyles would provide breadcrumbs to follow. As more pieces fell into place, the FBI's net began to tighten. A small property in rural Indiana, rented under yet another alias, caught Quinn's attention. The renters had paid cash, avoided interactions with neighbors, and left abruptly without notice, a hallmark of the Whites' modus operandi. While Randy had remained vigilant, Donna's growing emotional exhaustion had started to show. She missed her family and longed for a semblance of normalcy, a vulnerability that Randy feared could expose them. In their most recent town, Donna had confided in a sympathetic neighbor during a moment of weakness. While she didn't reveal their true identities, she shared just enough about their struggles to raise suspicion. The neighbor's passing comment to a local postman, "They're so private, almost like they're hiding something," eventually reached the ears of law enforcement, adding another piece to the puzzle. By mid-2004, the FBI had narrowed their search to a handful of regions. Agent Quinn, ever methodical, orchestrated a plan to surveil properties linked to the Whites' aliases without tipping them off. The couple, blissfully unaware of the renewed efforts, had grown comfortable in their latest location, a small town surrounded by endless farmland. But comfort often breeds carelessness, and the Whites were no exception. Quinn's team monitored the area discreetly, gathering intelligence and waiting for the right moment to strike. As the days passed, the anticipation grew, the agents sensing they were on the cusp of a breakthrough. Would the Whites sense the noose tightening, or had their years of freedom dulled their instincts? Quinn knew he couldn't afford to make a misstep. The Whites had demonstrated remarkable resourcefulness, and a single sign of the FBI's presence could send them fleeing once again. He devised a meticulous sting operation to apprehend them without incident. The FBI deployed agents disguised as utility workers, delivery personnel, and construction crews to blend into the quiet neighborhood. Surveillance teams monitored the Whites' home around the clock, noting their routines and movements. Randy, still cautious after all these years, noticed subtle changes. He spotted unfamiliar vehicles parked in the neighborhood and a utility crew that seemed to linger longer than necessary. "They're watching us," he told Donna one evening, his voice tense. Donna dismissed his concerns as paranoia. "You're imagining things, we've been careful," she said, though her trembling hands betrayed her unease. Unshaken, Randy began preparing for the worst. He packed emergency bags, rehearsed escape routes, and mentally reviewed their contingency plans. Yet even his vigilance couldn't stop what was coming. On a chilly morning in late spring, the FBI made their move. Quinn's team coordinated a simultaneous blockade of the Whites' property and the surrounding roads to prevent any escape. Randy was the first to sense something was wrong. As he stepped outside to leave for work, he noticed a van parked farther down the street than usual. His instincts screamed at him to turn back, but before he could act, unmarked vehicles swarmed the property. "Randy White, this is the FBI. Put your hands where we can see them." Randy froze for a moment, his mind racing through possible escape scenarios. He turned toward the house, but agents were already closing in from all sides. Inside, Donna's worst fears came true as she saw armed agents through the window. Grabbing her children, she huddled with them in a corner, trembling as the front door burst open. "Donna White, you're under arrest," an agent called out as they entered. The couple's carefully constructed world collapsed in an instant. As the trial of Randy and Donna White began in late 2005, the courtroom quickly became a media frenzy. The arrest of the couple, after years of evading capture, had captivated the public's imagination. They were not just two ordinary criminals. They were symbols of an almost mythic level of deception and audacity. The Whites had managed to disappear without a trace for 12 years, leading to an intense fascination with their lives, their motives, and their eventual capture. The prosecution, led by Assistant U.S. Attorney Cynthia Farrell, painted a picture of two cold, calculating criminals who had committed one of the most audacious heists in recent memory. The fact that they had planned and executed the crime with such precision, then lived on the run for over a decade, made their actions even more damning in the eyes of the court. Farrell emphasized the scale of the robbery, the theft of $3 million, and the impact it had on the victims, including the financial institutions and the families affected by their crime. She argued that the Whites' choice to take the money and run, abandoning their previous lives, was an act of pure greed and selfishness. Their crime wasn't just about the money, Farrell said in her opening statement. It was about their complete disregard for the law and for the lives of everyone they left behind. They believed they could live in secrecy forever, and they almost got away with it. Defense attorney Mark Dawson, however, painted a very different picture. He depicted Randy and Donna as victims of circumstance, people driven to crime by a combination of financial desperation and a desire for a better life. Dawson suggested that the robbery had been a spur-of-the-moment decision, not an indication of inherent criminality. He focused on Donna's emotional breakdown and Randy's remorse, hoping to humanize the couple in the eyes of the jury. Randy and Donna White were simply ordinary people who, for a moment, thought they could escape the pressures of their lives, Dawson argued. They never planned to harm anyone. They made mistakes, huge mistakes, but they are not evil. As the trial unfolded, it became clear that the defense had little chance of overcoming the mountain of evidence stacked against the couple. Video footage of the robbery, witness testimonies, and the fact that they had spent over a decade living in hiding all pointed to their guilt. The question in the courtroom shifted not to their innocence, but to the nature of their punishment. When the sentencing phase of the trial arrived, the courtroom was once again packed with reporters and spectators eager to see the outcome. Randy and Donna sat stoically, their faces hard to read as the judge addressed them. Their lives, once defined by the thrill of the heist and the fear of capture, now rested in the hands of the court. The prosecution pushed for the maximum sentence, arguing that the scale of their crime and their years on the run warranted harsh punishment. They requested sentences of 25 years for Randy and 20 years for Donna, citing the financial impact of their actions, as well as the emotional toll on their families. The defense, however, argued that the Whites had committed a nonviolent crime and that they had already paid a steep price for their actions by living in constant fear for over a decade. Donna, in particular, was portrayed as a woman who had been consumed by guilt and remorse for years, someone who had already endured a psychological prison. They asked for leniency, arguing that a lengthy sentence would not serve the interests of justice, but would instead be a prolonged form of punishment for someone already mentally and emotionally broken. Judge Daniel Hargrove, who had presided over the case, took all these factors into account. He acknowledged the serious nature of the crime, but also recognized that Randy and Donna had not caused direct physical harm to anyone. The couple's years of evasion had certainly caused harm, but the question of how much punishment was truly necessary was not easily answered. In the end, Randy received a sentence of 18 years in federal prison, while Donna received 15 years. The sentences were harsh compared to the nature of their crime, but not as severe as the prosecution had hoped. The ruling sparked debate in the media and legal circles. Was it too lenient for a crime of such magnitude? Or too harsh for a couple that had committed a nonviolent robbery, then spent over a decade in hiding? Legal scholars and commentators argued both sides. Some believed that a long sentence was necessary to send a message about the severity of financial crimes, while others felt that the psychological toll on the Whites had already been punishment enough. As the Whites were taken into custody to begin their sentences, the media shifted focus to their motivations and the psychological toll of living as fugitives. Documentaries and true crime specials were made, piecing together the story of their robbery, their years on the run, and their ultimate capture. But behind the sensational headlines, a deeper story emerged: the human cost of their actions. Randy, in interviews during the trial, revealed that the decision to steal the money had not been easy. At the time, the couple was struggling financially. Randy had been laid off from a construction job, and Donna had been working multiple part-time jobs to make ends meet. The thought of walking away with millions of dollars, of never having to worry about money again, had been intoxicating. "We thought we were smarter than everyone else," Randy admitted, his voice hoarse with emotion. "We were tired of struggling, tired of living paycheck to paycheck. The idea of taking that money and disappearing. It felt like freedom. But it was a lie. The freedom we thought we had was just a cage we built for ourselves." Donna, speaking in a rare interview following her sentencing, echoed Randy's sentiments but added a layer of regret. "I thought we could escape. I thought we could make a new life for ourselves, but it wasn't real. We were always running, always looking over our shoulder. And now, I've lost everything." The psychological toll on the Whites was undeniable. Despite their initial excitement over the money, the years they spent living in fear, constantly changing their identities, and never being able to fully trust anyone, took a profound toll on their mental health. Randy and Donna both suffered from anxiety, paranoia, and, in Donna's case, depression. In their quieter moments, both Randy and Donna had to confront a harsh reality. They had traded their old lives for something worse. The constant fear of discovery, the erosion of their connection with each other and their children, and the knowledge that their crime would eventually catch up with them, left them hollowed out. In the end, the money they had stolen was nothing more than an illusion of security. The story of Randy and Donna White didn't end with their sentencing. Their story became a cautionary tale, one that resonated with a wide audience. For some, it was a narrative of greed and ambition gone awry. For others, it was a warning about the costs of desperation and the illusion of freedom. The White's story raised uncomfortable questions about the nature of crime and punishment. How far could someone be pushed before they made a decision that changed their life forever? Were they simply criminals or victims of a system that failed them? Their case became a touchstone in debates about financial crime and its consequences. Some argued that nonviolent financial crimes like the White's heist should carry less severe punishments. Others believed that crimes of this scale, even without violence, were still deeply harmful to society and should be met with a harsh response. But perhaps the most enduring legacy of their story was the human cost of crime. Randy and Donna had not just stolen money, they had stolen years from their own lives, from their children's lives, and from the families they had once known. Their pursuit of freedom had ultimately left them trapped in a different kind of prison, one made of guilt, regret, and the weight of their own choices. In the end, the White story was about more than just a heist. It was about the lengths people would go to for freedom, the high price of greed, and the toll that living a lie could take on the human soul. Years after Randy and Donna White were sentenced for their daring heist, their story lingered in the collective memory as a stark cautionary tale of ambition, deception, and the consequences of desperation. Their crime, once the subject of widespread media attention, had faded from the headlines, but the lessons it left behind continued to resonate, particularly in the world of financial crime, law enforcement, and the families torn apart by such acts. Although the Whites never publicly disclosed what happened to the $3 million, theories about its fate persisted. Some believed that the money had been hidden away in offshore accounts, far beyond the reach of authorities. Others speculated that Randy and Donna, in the years of living under false identities, had liquidated the stolen funds to sustain their nomadic existence. However, the money's disappearance wasn't as important as the irreversible toll it took on the couple. The Whites had gone from two people living paycheck to fugitives, constantly running from the past. And in their flight, they lost the very things they had hoped to preserve: their family, their future, and their own peace of mind. Their children, now young adults, carried the burden of their parents' crime into their own lives. Though they were too young to understand fully when the heist occurred, the impact of their parents' actions was undeniable. Friends and classmates learned of their connection to the infamous Whites, and the public's fascination with their family's criminal past added an overwhelming layer of complexity to their lives. For many years, the children grappled with a dual identity, part of a family torn apart by crime, yet also trying to create their own future in a world that would always define them by their parents' actions. In the years that followed, the story of Randy and Donna White became more than just a tale of crime. It became a stark warning about the costs of living outside the law. Their hope for a better life, built on a foundation of stolen money, had come at an inescapable price. For the Whites, the lesson was clear. In the end, no one can truly escape the consequences of their actions. After Randy and Donna White were captured and sentenced, their lives took a dramatic turn. Randy, sentenced to 18 years in federal prison, began serving time at a high-security facility. Donna, sentenced to 15 years, was placed in a separate correctional institution. Both were isolated from the world they had once known, their lives now consumed by the consequences of their actions. Reports suggest that, although both children faced a tumultuous period after their parents' capture, they worked hard to distance themselves from the crimes that had defined their family. One of the children is said to have pursued higher education, while the other focused on establishing a career in a completely different field, far removed from any criminal connections. Friends and family members have described them as determined individuals, trying to forge their own identities in a world that often viewed them through the lens of their parents' actions. FBI investigator Quinn saw his own career and personal life affected by the case. The hunt for the Whites had consumed him. His obsession with the case had strained his personal relationships. His marriage had faltered, and his physical health had deteriorated due to the stress. Despite this, Quinn continued his work with the FBI, though the White case remained a defining chapter of his career. The case was a reminder of how even the most committed pursuit of justice can exact a heavy price.